Hi everyone, it's Kash. We finished the session earlier today and we didn't record this bit, which I'm glad about because there was a lot of really useful conversation that was to do with the simulation that became part of this discussion. And also, I was moving the slides on quite slowly so that we could all contribute. So, this is very much the Padlet version of the Lencioni model that I did earlier. The purpose of this is a bit of a refresh for you to have in terms of reference that you can utilize if you're out and about doing work with teams. And it's a model that I use personally quite often. And it's something that I talk a lot about when it comes to leaders. And it's really similar to the 10 Fab Teams model in that it's quite easy and simple to explain. It does have its limitations. In many cases, it isn't as dynamic as it could be, perhaps, but actually, from a practical perspective, a simple perspective, it really is a nice way of engaging leaders in the narrative around their role in shaping culture. So, as a reminder, it's a triangle. The way it works, it it kind of starts at different levels, and the way that Lencioni describes his model is he describes dysfunctions of teams, and he describes these several different dysfunctions. And what I'm going to do now is talk you through what the dysfunctions actually are, what a dysfunctional team looks like when it's in the middle of that dysfunction, and how what a team looks like when it isn't in the middle of that dysfunction. So a team that's overcome that dysfunction and some of the tools that you can then use in making that transition and working with leaders and actually showing them how you can go from left to right. Quite often, when you do that piece of work, which is to take your time to explain to a leader how you can help them, it really does engage them in the content and actually engages them in the process of starting these conversations with their teams. So let's look at the dysfunctions to begin with. So at the bottom, the foundational dysfunction is trust. And actually, a dysfunction of a high performing team is that there isn't any trust. Secondly, a fear of conflict that actually is not just conflict, but people are too scared to have it. Thirdly, a lack of commitment. So people aren't really committed to the things that they say they're doing, which then creates an avoidance of accountability. And then finally, the inattention to results is basically the team doesn't really know where it's going. So when we work with teams who are in that dysfunction at the bottom of the pyramid, when we work with teams who are essentially without trust, some of the things that you get are on the slide. So you get individuals actively concealing the things that they're not good at. People generally don't ask for help. There's a failure to recognize talents and actually access those talents. So it's not even accessing, it's about actually they don't even see the talents. You see a nice, lovely monoculture happening. Grudges are held, so things that might have happened years ago and in previous roles. And again, in some of our organizations, people move around a lot. People hold those grudges, which isn't really good for culture. It's not good for culture anywhere in any type of organization. It's how you overcome it. And fundamentally, it's a very individualistic mindset. So people generally tend to spend a lot of time alone in their roles. Whereas on the right hand side, when you flip the switch and you look at it from a team that has an abundance of trust, you see people who actively admit their weaknesses, actively talk about the mistakes they've made, but also within that, they talk about the things that they did well and the strengths that they have. So it's a balanced conversation. They accept questions about how their project or their responsibility should be done. And it's not seen as interference, it's seen as a legitimate curiosity from their colleagues about, showing their work. And as part of the modules that we've been covering, we talked about how do you inquire and seek first to understand. So it's you seeking to understand how your colleague is going to go about delivering this work and then adding value. So not micromanaging, but adding value and offering views, as it says there. And then when sometimes things do overstep, it's being able to offer and accept apologies without hesitation. So that's almost the opposite of holding a grudge. So how do you overcome that? You operate in that way. Again, a link to the 10 fab things fab teams do. There's a link between trust and thinking the very best of people. Because if you think the worst of people, then you're going to start drifting towards the left-hand side. And actually, in thinking the best of people, you're maintaining that trust and that vulnerability-based trust that is needed. And actually, when you fundamentally like the work that you do, you like the way that you do it because you're maximizing your strengths and you're working well as a team, then you do look forward to spending time together. So it's a really obvious outcome. The way that I've worked to establish the trust within a team. There's different tools that you can use. There's an exercise called the artifact exercise, where often you ask a leader or the team itself, the whole team, to bring things that are important to it in personal items, personal artifacts, and you encourage a discussion about that, which starts to build the trust. It starts to humanize team members. It starts to build those human relations at work. The other way of doing it, obviously, is through individual group psychometrics, and then having really good conversations about feedback. And when you're having those conversations about feedback, it's again looking at what's on the right hand side. It's taking a few risks with it and really getting underneath the surface. Another approach that is used quite a lot, and again, I'm a huge fan of coaching, but it's having strengths-based coaching conversations in teams and making sure that coaching skill set is present within the leader and the team, and actually they know when to push, when to pull, when to have those conversations. So the inquiry piece is quite a strong capability that you see in trusting teams. The trust equation, which there's a separate video on, we'll do that. We'll share that with you in due course, is very much a way of understanding what people value and how they go about creating that trust. And again, some cultures arrive at trust very differently. So there's a model where colleagues from different, for example, countries might arrive at trust from you have to earn it, and others it's a given until you break it. So there's different ways in which people turn up with trust. In terms of the leader, the demonstration of that vulnerability-based trust is role modelable, if that's a word. So that the leader can initiate that trust by sharing something really vulnerable in themselves, but they do that in the right way. And again, when you work with people and you do that in a way that isn't authentic, then people can spot that really, really quickly. So it's being really mindful of that. So that's trust then. That's quite a big chunk of what, when I'm working with a team or when one of my colleagues, when experienced consultants are working with a team, what to look out for. Next, when we look at conflict then. So how does conflict actually turn up when it's in a dysfunctional team? Well, some of the meetings can be quite dry, quite boring, quite agendaless, one voice meetings where the leader is basically having a meeting and it's just them that talks, it's just them that puts the agenda together. How many teams do you know like that? Or are you in a team like that where you essentially have no say in how the team meeting is run? Environments where personal politics thrives, so all the stuff that was underneath. So the absence of trust sort of filters up. This is what's rising to the surface now, which eventually gets you to not having the results that you want. So one of the things that rises to the surface from this piece is around environments where personal politics thrive because grudges are kept and grudges are actively, nothing is done about them. And because people don't feel very safe in those sorts of environments, the controversial topics that are really important to success never get discussed. And you then, when that happens, you don't really talk about the important and necessary things that are there. There's a huge inclusion piece here. So when you get traditional meetings or traditional environments, when somebody is legitimately different, they might be from a different culture, different background, different way of thinking, different gender, whatever it is, if they're different, then they're not going to really engage until they feel safe enough. And actually, if you look at the second peak, the second line, where if it's an environment where the personal politics thrive, then they're likely to subscribe to that, aren't they? Whereas when you look at it on the right-hand side, people in trusting teams, the meetings are always lively and interesting. So actually, when you build from the bottom, when you build from where we were with the trust, actually, and people admit mistakes and they work together and they accept questions, it creates a real dynamism. And actually, it's pretty normal for people to disagree and disagree well and fall out. But fundamentally, the leader of those teams or those sorts of teams, what they're doing is they're exploiting all the talents that are available to them in their team. And when that happens and a problem comes up, somebody will likely have done it before somewhere. So problems generally get solved quickly, or there's like a can-do attitude, and the relationships are there. People work together, meld together, which is the opposite of what was on the left-hand side. Politics are very minimal. There might be a few bits of politics. You can't get away from that when you get people in a work environment or in any environment, frankly. But actually, the critical difference between a trusting team and a dysfunctional team is essentially that things get discussed, topics are put up for discussion, for discussion and for solutions. And actually, from a practitioner's perspective, the way that I would turn up with techniques for this is actually very deliberately asking the team for things that they are undiscussables, mining for conflict. How would you go about having a conversation about X and noticing what you notice when you work with a team that has topics like that? And there's no perfect answer usually, but how they turn up is really quite important. So if there's an active discussion about it, brilliant. You've got a team that's more trusting. Real-time permission is essentially being able to ask for feedback in the moment, or give feedback in the moment and ask for permission to say, actually, I'm just going to share some feedback with you about how this is landing or what I'm noticing. And that isn't seen as a criticism. It's because the relationships are there, the trust is there. So it's built on that trust. You often get a more optimal outcome because some other bit that hasn't been thought about has been thought about and then is included or not included, but it's been discussed and considered as part of the solution. Empty chair thinking is something that came up in this organization where you envision a client or a customer or the conflict that you're dealing with, and you put it in the chair and you have a conversation with it. And again, coaching skills are really necessary for that. It's an important part of getting the team to think about some new areas or new insights that they might need. And in terms of the leader, and quite often leaders who are in charge of teams where conflict is high are quite good at managing that conflict. And one of the key things that leaders are good at in those teams is allowing that conflict to continue until a certain point. And actually, it's being confident as a leader to say, actually, I'll let this see where this pans out. And then ultimately, the leader might make a decision, but actually, they allow for that conflict to take place and they allow for those dynamics to work themselves out in the team setting. So that's conflict, and you can see how there's a build on trust. You need the trust to then lead you to conflict, and often you have to work at both at the same time. Often you have to work all up and down this model at the same time, but it gives you a flavor of what sorts of techniques you can use at each level. So then when we look at commitment, lack of commitment, as I say, as a dysfunction, you get ambiguity. So if you look at a dysfunctional team on the left-hand side, there's ambiguity in the team about what's important about the direction and the priority. So it's not just about what's important, but what order, the prioritization of tasks. There's not an agreement about that. There's a lack of confidence in delivery, and there's a fear of failure, again, because of what's underneath it, you see. So you have to almost imagine if avoiding time together, spending time together on grudges and hesitation for help, asking for help and weaknesses is the foundation, then when you start getting into delivery mode, which is where commitment comes in, this is where you get that fear of failure playing out. Often you'll get things like, and you can see it there, we've tried this before, but have you tried it now? Would be the sort of thing a team on the trusting side would say. Discussions are revisited again and again, just to undermine them quite often, or there's some politics going on often. And where you get is people in that team are often second guessing, am I doing the right thing? How is this going to land? They're almost overthinking what they're trying to do, and they're burning themselves out because there is that lack of commitment to what's really, really important. On the right hand side, then, when you work in a team that has that vulnerability based trust, and it's overcome that dysfunction, so that basically there is a commitment in that team. There is a clarity around focus, direction, and priorities, which is one of the things a fab team does. And you can see on the list there's a couple of things that a fab team does, which looks at shared objectives that everybody signs up to, and it's not just signing up to. It's not just the fact that they're done once and they're finished. Actually, it's shared and it's continuous. It's not just a one-off. It's there. It's a dynamic process. learn from mistakes. So there might be experiments that those organizations, that those teams try. Sorry, and again, that comes from, if you think about the absence of trust. When you think about how when there is trust and there is constructive conflict, then people will try things and they will make mistakes and actually learn from those mistakes and not blame others, but mind keep the learning and keep evolving. Very pioneering teams are often like this, and actually, when a change is needed or there's something that needs to happen, they don't overthink it. They just move forward with it because they know it's they're going in that direction. There is a commitment to move forward, and the big technique on this one is, guess what? Contracting skills, which it's teach it a lot. Contracting skills is all about creating unambiguous clarity about what's needed and how to take the next step. And once you've agreed what you're going to do and it's shared, because it's not just about contracting and that's it. It's a dynamic conversation, but then you share what you've discussed, and that creates that clarity, it creates that focus, it creates those clear messages that describe what it is you're going to do and when it is you're going to do it. And it's a dynamic and evolving thing. So when something changes, you go back to the contracting checklist and you re-communicate it. The fab teams exercises, so getting the 10 things that fab teams do and having a discussion about it and looking at your top three and your bottom three, those sorts of exercises are going to get your levels of commitment out, especially the first couple of statements in there around clarity, around focus, direction, what we're here to do. And again, looking at this from a leadership perspective, the leader's ability to create that clarity for all. It doesn't need to be super clear, ultra clear. It's clear enough. This is where we're going, because again, I don't want to suggest that leaders have to have the answers and have to be perfect all the time. They have to be perfect. It has to be clear enough for you to be able to, for the team, sorry, to be able to work with and get in a certain direction. And then if something changes, obviously, then the leader creates clarity that they don't. So this has changed, or in some cases, the leader might even say, "I don't know." That's okay. Again, how many leaders do you know that are like that? So you can see how commitment builds on conflict and it builds on trust and actually gets us to start looking at accountability, which is the next behavior, which is the next dysfunction, should I say. So when we look at accountability from the perspective of a dysfunctional team, these are the sorts of things you can see on the left that start to happen or happen regularly. So there's resentment between team members who might operate at different standards. So standards are really important in teams where you have things that are being delivered, quality of product, quality of service, and actually one person's idea of great might be a 3 out of 10, and another person's idea of great might be a 9 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10. And actually, if they're both getting paid the same, or there's an equal reward for them, then obviously you will get resentment. And often the nine will come to a five, and a three will probably go even lower. Who knows? The point I'm making here is that the standards are really important, and mediocrity is acceptable. And sometimes mediocrity doesn't even happen. Sometimes you get targets missed. Quite often you don't do the things that you say you're going to do on a regular basis, and the leader carries the can for that, carries the burden and the sole responsibility for that. So again, you can see how ambiguity and boring meetings and not talking about your strengths can really quickly escalate into deadlines being missed. And again, working with teams, you can often see that happening. And that's what gets discussed when you ask a question about what's important. On the flip side, when you work with a team that's overcome that dysfunction, so the opposite of avoidance of accountability is actually acceptance and taking on accountability. You get standards that are agreed. The performance, the pressure to improve comes from within the team, not just the leader. Everybody's working on the same level. Everybody's set this to working to a set level of standard that's been agreed. So again, that clarity of focus, the stuff that was behind that, which is that everybody's committed, everybody's had a conflict around it. So therefore, these are the standards that we're going to work on. Problems that then happen get identified out of curiosity and inquiry. And again, if you think about looking at how somebody should do their job, for example, those discussions then become very, very important around accountability, which is around actually this is the task and this is how I would do it, how you do it, and being curious about where there might be some skills or knowledge gaps. So you can see it's a dynamic conflict-ridden thing that we're talking about here on the right. So it's not without its challenges, but it's an important aspect of a team that has really high level of accountability. And fundamentally, there's a respect between team members, and very little politics. If you think about what was in the fear of conflict section, very little in the way of red tape, and very clear around what good looks like, what performance is for that function, whatever it might be. And actually, in terms of how do you get to accountability, very simply put, well, you publish, you share what it is you're going to be doing, and you make that really easy for people to engage with and understand. And you review it regularly. So you make sure that it doesn't just get published over there and then you leave it for a year. No, that's kind of more working towards the dysfunctional side. You actually keep it active, keep it dynamic, keep the conversation moving. You use and update that document. And please don't think there's going to be a neat document. It's going to look like a bit of a mess that you're constantly making sense of. That's pretty normal. And the leader essentially enables the team to act as that primary accountability mechanism, because they've created a culture, and this is where culture comes in, within the team, to make sure that what's happening on the left-hand side isn't happening. So the dysfunctions are managed, and fundamentally what's happening on the right-hand side is part and parcel of what's happened. So when you get accountability as the focus, when you get commitment to accountability, that's what that looks like. You get attention to results. You get a focus on results. And in dysfunctional teams, that those high performers, those high achievers, the ones that want to stay, and the ones that you want to build your team around and fundamentally want to retain, they leave when you get the dysfunctions playing out. This is why usually when you talk to them, they usually leave for a myriad of reasons that are listed on that side of the document. Um, Team members lose focus on what's important, and if you think about how the team works, it's very, very easily distracted because it doesn't have a true north. It doesn't have this is where we're trying to get to. Anything goes. Anything that comes in might be, oh, this is nice and shiny, let's work on it. So I think focus is really important, and attention to results is really critical. The final point in dysfunctional teams is that team members focus on themselves. So they focus on their individual goals at the cost of the team. Whereas in teams that are highly tuned to results, that doesn't happen as much. So in teams that are focused on results, you do get people that are focused on their individual goals, but actually those individual goals are aligned with what the team's trying to do. It's helping the individual reach where they want to reach, but also while they're doing that, help the team get to where they're trying to get to. So you get a minimalization of that individualistic behavior. Distractions are avoided because the team knows exactly where it's going. And actually, you do get retention of people who are committed to that particular goal, staying and contributing and maximizing their talents. Equally, because of what I've shared with you already, the team it's not always a happy place, because there will be success, but there will be failures, there will be mistakes. It's how the team goes about addressing those individual things, those situations that arise when they arise. So the final bit then, for if for practitioners to think about, is how do you get to inattention and results? Well, you declare them publicly. You say we are going to be working on these things, and if you have a board or an accountability framework or a governance or whatever, whoever's holding you to account from outside, share that with them. This is our where we're trying to get to. These are the outcomes and outputs that we're trying to achieve. And actually, the role of the leader is to basically set the tone for that and focus the team on where that the team, are trying to go, and then take the individual members of the team with them. Now, leadership is something that I don't want us to underestimate here. Designing the leadership roles that fulfill what's in the blue there, really important. And teaching leaders how to build trust, how to manage conflict, how to create that commitment and accountability and keep focused on results isn't straightforward. It is an experiential piece, but also you can teach what I'm showing you here, which is why we're working on it. It's a model that is useful. And I think helpfully when you outline it in the way that I have here, and you're working with a leader that really, really has ambitions and wants to improve their team, then it usually does land really well. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that was useful, and I'm keen to hear your feedback as you've engaged with this video. So thank you so much for your time. Cheers. Bye.